I love nothing more than diving into the Morgan Stanley World Cup of Watches Premier League table annual results, otherwise known as the industry review of who's doing well, who's doing poorly in the Swiss watch industry, done by Morgan Stanley. So far, I've done a video looking at Rolex and Tudor. I've done another video looking at the 6 brands that have entered the top 50 and by definition, the 6 brands that left and what that tells us. Today, I want to cover my favorite brand, a brand I'm into and that you've all been asking me about, that is Breitling. Hi, I'm Pete McConville, and this is what I love doing, overthinking, overanalyzing, and just geeking out on watches, probably more than they deserve. If that sounds like something you're into, keep on watching. And if I do a halfway decent job, hit the whole like, subscribe, notify button at the end. What I want to do today is dive into the Morgan Stanley results for Breitling. Now, across the board, if you look at the sweep of the Morgan Stanley results for Breitling since the first report in 2027, this is a story of a meteoric rise. Breitling were barely hanging on to the top 20 in 2017. They came in at 17th, and their numbers across the board were pretty bloody average, to be honest. However, fast forward just 6 years, and what you now see is a Breitling inside and firmly inside the top 10 Swiss watch manufacturers. You see that their average price has gone up. You see that their profits have gone up. You can see elsewhere that the valuation of the company has like quadrupled. So clearly there's a lot that's gone right for Breitling. Very broadly, over the last 6 or so years, really one big thing has happened, which is an old management has left and an entirely new management team has come in. That entirely new management team has changed everything about the brand. And I think its rise has to be attributed to 2 broad streams: brand management and watchmaking. From a brand management point of view, what you see are, for example, new ads. The very sexist, misogynistic kind of ads that they used to run have gone and been replaced by ads which are much more diverse and inclusive and representative, much more welcoming to new people. That flows on to the ambassadors. So the ambassadors who frankly had started to become a bit toxic have been shuffled off, and new ambassadors representing a much broader, a lot more casual and a lot more diverse group have come in. And that Breitling is trying to position itself as a much more interesting, diverse, much more participatory as opposed to spectator sport. So as I said, sports that people watch are out. So tennis and golf and Formula 1 are gone. And sports that people do, like surfing and triathlon, they're in. And I think that captures kind of what Breitling's trying to do. And they've done that really effectively, and the brand has benefited from that. On a more, if you like, on a drier economic note, they've also just made some basic changes. They've improved their relationship with the ADs, getting rid of a lot of third-party distributors, which gives them direct access to the ADs. They've introduced 250 of their own company boutiques, which also gives the brand direct access to consumers and direct feedback from those consumers. It's opened a brand new website with an e-commerce directive, which again gives them much better feedback to and from consumers. And they've got a really motivated and a really hands-on CEO now that really gets involved in the running of the business and making sure that all the different parts of the business are talking to each other and playing nicely. And that's then resulted in a much smoother and much cleaner relationship between the catalog, the inventory that's generated, and the distribution. So the old days of multiple overlapping watches within a catalog that didn't really make a lot of sense, being massively overproduced and pumped out to these third-party distributors only to be sold at huge discounts later, has largely dried up as well. I'm not saying for an instant that you're paying Rolex-style premiums on Breitlings. Breitlings still get discounts, but the old days of like 50, 60, 70% discounts that you were getting from places like Germa Shop have largely dried up, and Breitling has become just another brand in that sort of area. In the watchmaking space, the number one thing that the new regime has done that the old didn't is it's brought design in-house. The old Breitling, pre-Georges Kern Breitling, had got to the point where it was outsourcing all of its design. It was losing control of who it was through the watches that it was getting designed for it. And that can't be a good place to be. But bringing all of that design in-house, you've now got a much more consistent basis upon which you can sort of have your own design ethos. And the paradox is, by bringing everything in-house to a single group of people and then them being able to form their own idea about what it is that Breitling is, not having to have it communicated by contract letter, you can in fact start to play a lot more. You can start to draw from wider experiences. And that's exactly what Breitling has done. The new Breitling isn't just locked into this very narrow view of who it is. You know, large pilot's watches, all blocked, all polished, all blingy, selling to a very niche and drawing from a very specific part of Breitling history. Breitling now is much more confident and is able to do watches that cover the entirety of Breitling history. The current catalogue draws from the 1940s, draws from the 1960s, draws from the 1970s and 80s, and brand new pieces. So it's a much more balanced, a much more interesting watchmaker than it was. And I think largely through the act of taking control of designing their own product. Okay, so that's the broad picture of how we got from 2017, 17th and languishing, to 2023, firmly inside the top 10 of Swiss watchmakers. So let's zoom in a little bit and look specifically at what's happened between 2021 and 2023. So in this last 2-year period where we have some pretty solid data from Morgan Stanley. Let's start with the good. Okay, so the good is they've gone from just outside the top 10 in 11th position on market penetration to 9th in 2023. So that's got to be good. The overall turnover of the company has increased markedly. In 2021, the turnover of the company was estimated to be about 680 million Swiss francs. In 2021, that's estimated to be 870 million Swiss francs per year. That's about a 28% increase in turnover in 2 years. Probably a bigger story is the change in average price, the implied retail price, the price that your average consumer walking out of an AD with a Breitling in their hand compares between 2021 and 2023. In 2021, the average price of that watch was 4,888 Swiss francs. That was something that looked like a basic three-hander, probably with a third-party movement. In 2023, that price had risen to 6,769 Swiss francs. That's a 38% increase in price in a 2-year period. That far outstrips just inflation. It far outstrips any kind of price rises that Breitling has instituted. What it reflects is that people have gone from predominantly buying one kind of Breitling to now buying a whole new kind of Breitling. That new kind of Breitling is likely going to be an in-house chronograph, as I said, compared to the three-hander with a third-party movement that was the average watch leaving a Breitling AD just 2 years ago. From a purely monetary, cash sort of point of view, it's interesting looking at that number. That number, 6,769 Swiss francs, means that the average Breitling leaving an AD costs more than the average Cartier. It costs more than the average Omega. It's just 250 Swiss francs cheaper than the average IWC. It's twice the price of the average Tudor, 3 times the price of the average Tag. What that shows is that over time, but particularly in the last 2 years, people's ideas of what they're happy to spend, what they're happy to buy, and where Breitling sits in their kind of mind, what swim line they're in, what weight class they're in, if you like, has shifted. Breitling is clearly no longer in the Tag Tudor kind of space. They are now definitely in the Cartier Omega kind of space and potentially looking to move beyond that still. However, it's not all good. There is a slight downside, a slight bad side of what we see here. That all comes down to volume. Whilst turnover's gone up and average price has gone up, volume has gone down. Back in 2021, Breitling sold 190,000 watches. In 2023, that had reduced to 178,000 watches. And I think Breitling, that reduction is kind of captured by that idea of what the average watch is that's leaving a Breitling store. I've already said that at that price, what that means is the average Breitling is an in-house chronograph, and that's great. But go one step further, and that watch is probably going to be 40 millimeters or larger. That watch is probably going to have a lot of very heavy masculine cues and be directed towards men. So Breitling's kind of done well in convincing people to spend more on a Breitling. They've done well in convincing people to buy into this core idea of what Breitling is, which is a chronograph company. But that in itself is limiting. It's kind of a niche within a niche within a niche. Selling to enthusiasts is already a niche. Selling to men is another niche. Selling to chronograph wearing men who are also willing to spend, 6,000 to 8,000 Swiss francs on a watch is another niche. And I think that's a problem for Breitling. If they want to continue growing, I worry that the current strategies and the current what they've done both from a marketing point of view, but more from a watchmaking point of view, have painted them into a pretty lucrative and quite well paid corner that they might struggle to get out of unless they recognize where they're at and they take firm action to change. And at this point, I don't even really have to speculate, because you can look at what Breitling has done and you can listen to what they say, and you can see Breitling know that they've painted themselves into this corner and that they are doing something about it. First is the idea of the chronograph push. Breitling is well aware of the fact that it needs to do more. It needs to sell more. I think Breitling is also very aware, and George Kern has spoken about, when you become a watch brand, when you become a brand of any sort of, in any area, there's expectations of you when you hit a certain level. And he's said openly that at a certain level, whether they're better or worse, whether they provide any meaningful advantage, an in-house movement is just expected. And I think that is one of the reasons, that is probably the reason, why Breitling will be introducing a new in-house basic three-hander this year. He's flat out come and said it on several occasions. In 2024, there will be a new Breitling in-house movement. So I think that will address one of the big issues. Breitling doesn't sell to women much. It has an increasingly large and diverse range of women's watches, but it hasn't really cut through. I think part of that is a design issue. There's still sort of slightly feminized but essentially masculine watches. They haven't been ground up designed to be for women. I think there's an element of sizing that Breitling is really putting so much emphasis into its chronographs. The chronographs using a movement that can't go much below 40 millimeters means that the watches that are made in the sorts of sizes that would suit a wider range of people, particularly females, they just don't have movements for them. I've already spoken about how they're getting a new in-house movement. I understand that in-house movement will be designed to fit the same envelope as, say, an ETA 2824, which means you'll be able to make watches down to like 34 millimeters with that in-house movement. So that'll be a good step forward for them. And secondly, and clearly Breitling have gone out and started partnering with people like Victoria Beckham, her ready-to-wear company, with a design to, with an idea to bring Breitling to a whole new audience. I mean, once you pair up with someone like Victoria Beckham's company, once you get Victoria Beckham's clothing sort of also advertising your product to their tens of millions of Instagram followers, their tens of millions of followers elsewhere, then that can kind of sort of kickstart Breitling's push into the women's market, the more feminine market. Thirdly, Breitling has said, and George Kern has again flat out said, this isn't guesswork, this is me quoting him, has said that they're going to start introducing new in-house complications on top of their in-house movements. So at the moment, as soon as you get away from a fairly basic chronograph, or that they do have an in-house split-second chronograph, but as soon as you start getting into the calendar watches, etc., those are not based on the in-house Breitling movement. They go out for those things. I think what's going to happen is you're going to start seeing the Breitling movement be used as the base upon which world timers, annual calendars, moon phases, etc. will be added. Those will come from Breitling. And again, really the intent there is as a branding exercise. This is about showing that and acting like a company that deserves its place in firmly within the middleweight as opposed to the lightweight divisions of watchmaking. So those are all things that Breitling can do, knows it needs to do, and has started doing. But there's another problem. Breitling has said they want to stay roughly in the price range that they're in. They might go up a little bit, but they certainly don't see themselves going up into the 20, 30,000 Swiss franc, average selling price. The problem is that's where all the growth in the market is. If you aren't going into that, above 25,000 Swiss franc per watch price range, your ability to grow your market share is limited. So Breitling could do 1,000 things right. They could get their women's collection right. They could get their in-house movement up and running and expand the desirability of their three-handers. They could get a whole bunch of complications going. But as long as their average price is below that 25,000-ish Swiss francs, their actual ability to grow market share is limited. And I think Breitling know that, and I think that's exactly why they bought Universal Genève, because that's where the new and emerging Breitling group can have huge growth. They can have Breitling do well, continue to consolidate, perhaps climb up the rankings in the under 25,000 Swiss franc sort of group, I call it the middleweight group, and they'll have a whole new brand competing in the heavyweight division, and that whole new brand is going to be Universal Genève. And so whilst Breitling, the brand's market share might only grow only in very small amounts over the next little while, the Breitling Group's market share can explode. And ultimately, what a group cares about is group performance, not brand performance. So I think that is the long-term approach for the emerging Breitling Group. For Breitling to do well in its weight division, what I call middleweights, and for Universal Genève to make the growth in the heavyweight division. So anyway, that's my take on Breitling. Just generally in 2023, and in particular comparing their 2021 and 2023 numbers and where I think they're going to go. What do you guys think? Am I completely out of whack? Do you think Breitling has topped out, doesn't deserve to be where it's going to be, and will tumble down the lists? Do you think that this is all smoke and mirrors, or do you think that Breitling will continue their charge and, regardless of UG, continue to grow up the ladder? Personally, I can't see that can happen all on their own. But if you think it can, I'm fascinated to know how you think that'll occur. I've been Pete McConville. This is what I do. I will see you later.